Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. My name is Wilbert Mukori. Tonight, I would like to discuss the issue of the opposition. The people of Zimbabwe have risked everything, life and limb and livelihoods, to elect the opposition for the express purpose, at least in the last 23 years, for the express purpose of implementing the democratic reforms and thus stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. That point must be made very clear. Earlier on this evening, I produced a video where I was talking of the possibility, there's no clear evidence yet, that SADC are still pursuing the issue of the rigged elections and are willing to, and according to some of the reports they have sent, or they're sending tomorrow, Friday, some elders at the advanced party of SADC leaders who come on the 19th of November to take up this issue of Zimbabwe's elections or this August were not free, fair, and credible. And in that video, what I had argued is what I was just repeating what I'd said before, that the solution would be for SADC to say, no, the elections were not free, fair, and credible. ZANU-PF does not have political legitimacy. And the best solution would be a national transition authority entirely composed of technocrats, where ZANU-PF and CCC are kept out of it because they are part of the problem. This apparently has annoyed some people, and so I've had an avalanche of comments where people, clearly supporters of CCC, have argued that CCC are competent and the solution should be CCC should be allowed to get into power. CCC, Nelson Chamisa and this CCC had apparently been arguing that the SADC should allow fresh elections in 3 to 6 months' time, which they will supervise. SADC will supervise. The alternative is to say that Nelson Chamisa won these elections and allow him to get into power. And that sentiment is what the CCC supporters are passionate about. I don't see that as the solution at all. CCC right now, just after the August elections, have had a number of their MPs and senators and councillors recalled by one of the members who claimed to be a CCC member. And the party has failed to prove that he wasn't. And so the recall has gone ahead. And we are now looking at a by-election on the 9th of December. That to me clearly shows that CCC has got a problem. And this cartoon that I'm showing on the picture there is a cartoon that has been taking the rounds, in which it depicts the CCC leader, Nelson Chamisa, being confronted with a column of his failures, of Triple C, the party's failures, on the right-hand side, and successes on the other. And the caption at the bottom of it is that he should not be in power at all, he should go. I think this issue of Triple C having been elected these last 23 years for the express purpose of implementing the democratic reforms. And those 23 years include 5 in the GNU, and yet they have failed to implement even one meaningful reform. To me, that is the biggest failure of Nelson Chamisa and his colleagues. And unfortunately, most Zimbabweans have failed to appreciate that. As much as many Zimbabweans have been clamoring for reforms, democratic change, the truth of the matter is most Zimbabweans out there have absolutely no clue what those reforms are, how they were to be implemented, and therefore then they've missed the reality that the GNU of 2008 to 2013, the primary purpose of that GNU was to implement the reforms. And the fact that MDC failed to implement even one meaningful reform during that period because of corruption and incompetence. There's no denying that Mugabe was president during the GNU, bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and the rest of his MDC friends with the trappings of power, and they forgot all about implementing reforms. This is at the heart of the problem here. An electorate that fails to understand what is going on is always going to be shortchanged. These individuals who are clamoring that they want to see Nelson Chamisa in power and his Triple C friends in power have no appreciation that MDC, Triple C have sold out on reforms. They've actually given up on implementing any meaningful reforms. They've been participating in these flawed elections for the purposes of winning the few seats that ZANU-PF has always allowed the opposition to win, to entice them to participate, because ZANU-PF needs the opposition to participate, to give the impression that Zimbabwe is a healthy and functioning democracy, when in reality it is not. We can go on in this vicious cycle, but we need to put an end to it. We cannot keep on having flawed elections and then people participate in them, then they claim the elections were flawed. At the beginning of the campaigning period, it was none other than Nelson Chamisa himself who said he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Even when people could say, how could you have plugged them with so many loopholes? I mean, one of the obvious ones was the failure to produce a verified voters roll. And yet he insisted that he had plugged the loopholes. And then the day after the election, he claims that there was rigging. We can't keep on moving back and forth on the same issue. You said yourself you had plugged the vote rigging. Clearly, you had not. So why did you lie to the people, enticing them to participate in a process that is so flawed that SADC, the AU, and all the election observers of any substance all condemned the process as flawed? And now we are finding ourselves in a situation where, if SADC was to come into this process, it'll be a blessing. And we cannot afford to waste it by pretending that allowing Nelson Chamisa and company to get into power will solve anything. It will not solve anything. That point must be made. It must be made very clearly. One of the issues that are listed on that board actually is that Nelson Chamisa and this Triple C failed to produce a constitution to govern Triple C structures and have elected officials. To me, this is such a fundamental issue. If the supporters of Triple C are serious about wanting Triple C to be a democratic party, how can you have a democratic party that doesn't have a constitution, that doesn't have structures, that doesn't have openly elected officials? Those things are as basic to democracy as free, fair, and credible elections. They're as basic as the Ten Commandments are to Christianity. You cannot pretend that those things are not important. In this case here, it only underlines that the people who are claiming, who are trying to propose to push Chamisa forward and this Triple C forward, have no clue what is happening here. And I think the people of Zimbabwe need a solution and not just keep on blundering from pillar to post. The truth of the matter is, Triple C had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms, which would have stopped ZANU-PF rigging elections and put an end to this cycle of rigged elections and bad governance. They failed to implement even one reform in 23 years, 5 of which in the GNU. And we, the people of Zimbabwe, need to have the courage and resolve to say you have failed. And think of another way forward. If SADC should come up tomorrow, it will be a pity if we are going to leave SADC in any doubt at all that ZANU-PF have failed the country, just as much as Triple C have failed the country. I believe both ZANU-PF and Triple C are as much part of the problem, and therefore then cannot be part of the solution. And I think we need to emphasize that to our SADC friends so that we leave them in absolutely no doubt. We do not want this endless cycle, to keep repeating this endless cycle. I'm just going to post one comment there from Grace, who is saying, no to new elections anytime soon, please. I totally agree with that sentiment. We cannot pretend that even if the fresh elections are supervised by SADC, they could deliver any meaningful change. They cannot. That is the truth. What would have changed? Key institutions like ZEC, the police, the army, which are all but ZANU-PF departments, in all but name, cannot be transformed in 3 months or 6 months. And as a Chamisa government, once in power, will not be able to transform those institutions. Because they're deeply entrenched. What we need is to implement the full raft of democratic reforms and transform those institutions, restore their independence. And that cannot be done by CCC or a Chamisa-led government. That can only be done by a national transition authority that is truly committed to having those reforms implemented. I think CCC at this moment, they are only interested in getting power, nothing else. So I would like to reiterate my position. If SADC keep their word and refuse to sweep the damning SADC report on Zimbabwe's elections, and send SADC leaders to Zimbabwe to implement, to say to ZANU-PF, you are illegitimate. The only viable solution is for the country to have a national transition authority composed entirely of technocrats who will implement all the democratic reforms. I cannot pretend or try to downplay the serious threat that ZANU-PF will make the country ungovernable. That is a reality that we cannot ignore. But accepting that reality, we have got to also accept that ZANU-PF is holding the nation to ransom, has held the nation to ransom for the last 43 years. And if we allow ZANU-PF to hold the nation to ransom, there is no getting out of this mess. So like I said before, the solution, the only solution, is a national transition authority composed of technocrats, but that requires, on our part, as much as on SADC's part, the guts to say to ZANU-PF, you cannot hold the nation to ransom. We have allowed ZANU-PF to hold the nation to ransom for the last 43 years, and look where we are. SADC itself must accept that as long as Zimbabwe continues to be a failed state, the whole region, political stability and economic development is at stake. That is the price we will have to pay to allow ZANU-PF to continue the way they are. As for our friends CCC, they have failed. To keep on pretending is only by those people who do not even understand what CCC were elected to do. Those who still believe that MISA is the best foot forward for the country, when they don't even know that for the last 23 years, MDC and CCC have sold out. We need to confront that reality ourselves to move the country forward. It is, yes, the country is a failed state. Getting out of it is not going to be easy, but we must get out of it. And this is the way out of it. We should not fool ourselves into thinking that we can somehow get out of this mess without making a serious effort. It is naive to think so, for both ourselves and SADC. And like I said, I seriously hope that SADC is going to leave to these rumors, that they are going to confront Mnangagwa and tell him that the 2023 elections, Zimbabwe elections, were flawed and illegitimate, and he is not the legitimate government. And they're not going to stop that. They're also going to confront him and tell him that he cannot hold the people of Zimbabwe to ransom. And we, the people of Zimbabwe, must also tell Mnangagwa in no uncertain terms that he cannot hold the nation to ransom. And as for our friends, Nelson Chamisa and his CCC friends, they have failed. We cannot pretend they know what they're doing. They don't. And the ordinary people out there, we also need to confront, to look ourselves in the mirror and say, we have failed ourselves. We've allowed this circus, this ZANU-PF regime to continue for 43 years, and for CCC, MDC to continue this last 23 years, dragging the nation deeper and deeper into this political and economic crisis. We need to wake up and deal with the issue, the realities, the challenges that we face as a nation. We cannot keep on pretending that we have got a viable opposition party when we don't. An opposition party that cannot even produce a constitution, a proper structure, have properly elected officials, and still pretends that it is a people's party. It's ridiculous. We should know what democracy means. after 43 years of independence, and in this day and age, 2,500 years after the Greeks defined democracy for us, for the world. That is the challenge. And I think we must face it and confront it and deal with it. This is not rocket science, just common sense. Thank you very much for listening, and good night.